We hear a lot about difficulties autistic people face in our lives. Anxiety, meltdowns, narrow interests, social inactivity and many more. But have you ever stopped to wonder, are all these traits part of autism itself or something else? This is the Autism Chicken and Egg Problem. The early 20th century saw a number of scientists in different parts of the world working on developing their observations of people who appeared to perceive and process the world differently into a formal classification. Most of the children studied were regarded by their parents or the authorities as being extremely disturbed and incompatible with society. It wasn't until Leo Kanner published his paper Autistic Disturbances of Affective Contact in 1943 that his definition of early infantile autism began to gain traction, and studies into this new classification would begin in earnest. Autism was seen then as a very rare juvenile diagnosis. It was observed mainly in boys and was considered a barrier towards leading the kind of life generally considered as normal. It was the foundation of many of the misunderstandings about autistic people that have survived to this day. Whilst medical science has updated and expanded upon Kanner's original work, even without the benefits of input from autistic people, many of the ideas and hypotheses from those early observations are still widely shared almost 80 years later. In the early 1980s, British researcher Lorna Wing provided perhaps the most significant leap forward in the understanding of autism since. She looked back to the work of other doctors who had studied the same phenomena as Kanner, which resulted in what we now call the autism spectrum. We now know that the form of autism defined by Kanner is only one view of a broader range of differences, and that autistic people are not actually as different to neurotypical people as once thought. There are autistic people with highly successful careers in science, commerce and the arts. Many of us are in long-term relationships, and plenty of us have children of our own, who, thanks to the heritable genetic nature of autism, are often autistic themselves. Entire families of autistic people covering several generations are now increasingly becoming identified, with parents and even grandparents receiving their diagnoses after that of their child or grandchild. Research into how autistic minds function and how to make life better for us is now starting to be driven forward by autistic voices becoming part of the academic and medical discourse. This revolutionary step is still in its infancy, but it's already showing the way, despite some notable resistance from the existing establishment. We have come a long way from the tentative steps into the light prompted by Leo Kanner's publication. Yet in many ways, we're still facing public opinion which is mired in darkness. The public perception of autism is so inaccurate and so biased towards behaviours which are considered antisocial or undesirable. It's almost cartoon-like in its inaccuracy. We are perceived as mere two-dimensional people, without depth, without subtlety, and with little social value. We are bombarded with language and expectations of failure, which is reflected in the way our news is reported and our societies function. We live in societies that praise individuality, even whilst encouraging conformity. We talk of freedom, yet criticise those whose opinions or actions differ from our narrow expectations. Governments make statements describing those who strive for a better quality of life and for equality as dissidents and agitators, urging their supporters to shun them, vilify them, stamp out their scourge on society. Difference of opinion invites name-calling and even threats. Political debates are crammed full of politicians and pundits, experts and educators, expressing their opinions on all and sundry. When one of them talks of an idea for change, they are readily dismissed with patronising scorn as missing the big picture, as if they were simpletons. Details are dismissed as irrelevant or just obstacles to the grander design. When we see someone who is dedicated to a cause or has a singular interest in a particular field, they are denigrated for having a one-track mind, as if having a significant passion or being an expert was something to be ashamed of. Even in the workplace, specialists and craftsmen have been sacrificed for generalists and automation. When a politician or a celebrity loses their temper or has an outright tantrum in public, it's portrayed in the media as a meltdown. A childish, emotionally stunted and possibly narcissistic reaction to criticism or failure. Anxiety and depression are portrayed as a curse on society and an inconvenience to employers. People suffering from both are often pitied and treated as emotionally weak for not having the strength to cope with modern life. At other times, they're just trivialised as another emotion. The anxiety that our chosen team might lose a match, or depression that our favourite show has been cancelled, are pale comparisons to the grim reality. Politicians who enact unpopular policies are readily labelled by the press and public alike as lacking empathy, their cruelty or lack of action being attributed to an inability to sense others' emotions or even to have emotions themselves. All these phrases and descriptors are readily levelled at autistic people and pathologised as inevitable facets of our personalities. They are listed as symptoms and used as examples of why we don't fit in and require correction. Yet the examples you've heard are all in relation to neurotypical people too. We list these attributes as being problematic behaviours for people in general, yet we have an ingrained belief that they are all inevitable expectations for those of us on the autism spectrum. Are these stereotypical behaviours attributed to autism actually part of what defines us as autistic though? The neurotypical view of autism and the corresponding diagnosis criteria for autism are almost exclusively based on behaviour. Yet, as autistic people continue to grow, communicate with one another, and share experiences, another picture of what defines autistic life is emerging. Many of those attributes given a negative spin are actually positives from our viewpoints, and others are unfairly attributed as being characteristic of autism when they should not. Autists don't often mourn that we don't fit into the cookie-cutter image of normal which society considers acceptable. We celebrate our differences and our freedom from groupthink. We find our pleasures and our fulfilment in things much of the world isn't even aware of or dismisses as mundane. We do, however, express our regret, sorrow, even anger that we are excluded from many aspects of everyday life because our thought processes and priorities are not focused on the same things. Our view of life is often far more detailed than the big picture so beloved of those who wish to condescend to their peers. Our pictures of the world are the accumulation of myriad tiny details that many of those around us miss. The big picture can be bereft of information that drastically changes perspective, yet our observations are relegated to minor inconveniences when they clash with the accepted view. Autistic minds commonly see large systems as an amalgam of multiple smaller systems, so we're not oblivious to the overall view, but we cannot ignore the elements from which it is formed. It's one of the reasons autistic people are well represented in science and technology. Many of us instinctively understand how small parts contribute to the greater purpose. When we talk, we share our frustration that those around us can't see those endless chains of cause and effect. If they did, they might not continue to make the same mistakes over and over. Whilst doctors and academics suggest autistic people have one-track minds or narrow interests, we share our joy in our special interests and our passions. The autistic mind is naturally predisposed to expertise. We have what are known as spiky skill sets as opposed to the level homogenised skills profiles more commonly seen. We don't make good generalists because our skills tend to be concentrated in specific fields, with corresponding paucity in other areas. When we become interested, we become very interested, and those interests may last months, years, or even a lifetime. What an asset such attention to detail and encyclopedic knowledge would be if utilised correctly. We despair at a society which cannot decide whether it needs experts or considers them a hindrance. At one moment we see politicians and industry leaders lambasting experts for disagreeing with their instincts and hunches. Yet as soon as a crisis hits that they can't handle with emotional appeals, they claim to be following the science and cite the very same experts they criticised moments before. In these examples, aspects of life that are enjoyed, even celebrated by autistic people as positive, life-enriching attributes, are shunned by a society that could benefit from them. Why is it that a child who demonstrates novel thought patterns, an eye for detail, and the potential to be an expert is segregated from their peers and treated as a problem needing to be fixed? Are our societies, our doctors, our educators and lawmakers really that ignorant? Let's look at a few more examples. When we talk of meltdowns and shutdowns, we don't talk of cures or therapies. We don't seek methods of mitigating such events, nor talk of the successes the people around us have had in controlling us or calming us. We talk of the events that cause them. We share stories of mistreatment, of shattered relationships, or of prejudice that kept us from achieving our potential. A meltdown for an autistic person is not a tantrum. It's not a selfish person acting out because they didn't get what they want. It's an expression of a severe accumulation of distress. Seen through non-autistic eyes, the cause of that distress may not be obvious, but it is there and it is chillingly real. If they could experience the world the same way, they might fall apart too. The sensory world of autistics is not the same as neurotypical people experience, but the lack of acknowledgement of this simple reality has led to our genuine breakdowns from unbearable stress being characterised as unreasonable. Instead of treating the cause, they've chosen to bear down on the result. Neither are anxiety and depression characteristics of autism, though they are commonly found in autistic people. They are commonplace, not because of our neurology, but because so many of us are not taken seriously. Any individual who is regularly ignored, who is told that what they see or hear is an illusion, or is ridiculed for stating what is to them obvious, is bound to suffer extreme distress over time. Such treatment is even used as a tool for torture or conditioning by government agencies against their enemies. This isn't something isolated to a few autistic children with bad parents. It's the accepted, state-sanctioned view of how we treat people who don't fit in or whose views don't match the accepted party line. This treatment lasts throughout our lives. So as adults we go through the same mental torture as in our formative years. The rate of suicide amongst autistic people is astronomically high, such as that it is the second highest cause of death in our community. When autists speak of anxiety and depression, it's not of inevitability or how cursed we feel to be living with it as a symptom of our neurological difference. We discuss the difficulty we have in being taken seriously, or of the lack of services available to us. We debate methods in which existing therapies could be improved to acknowledge and cater for autistic thought processes and the sensory offence caused by an over-loud, bright and hostile world. As with meltdowns, we exchange notes on the events or treatment that trigger our anguish. What of the supposed lack of empathy that frequently leads to speculation that failing politicians and dictators might be on the spectrum? Is that an autistic trait? Are we insensitive to the emotions of others or incapable of understanding their thought processes? I have yet to meet an autistic person who lacked emotion or who had no care for the feelings of others. Quite the contrary. Most will report that their depression, anxiety and even their meltdowns are triggered by the emotions of others. We are often very sensitive to the emotions of others and very careful to try not to upset them. Yet our minds function differently to those of neurotypical people. We don't sense the world in quite the same way, nor do we process information in the broad, homogenised way that's considered the norm. Cognitive empathy, or theory of mind, is a different process for us. The accepted view of empathy is of a simplistic heuristic process. Stimulus A is responded to by behaviour B. Those who are seen as particularly empathic may have a C and D at their disposal as well, but to the detail-oriented autistic mind there may be a whole alphabet of alternative responses to choose from, and that may take time to evaluate. Our empathy is not absent, it's different, and is necessarily so simply because we sense, understand and communicate about the world in a manner which differs from the majority. It's not that we don't possess empathy, we simply process and express it differently. Our withdrawal from emotional situations and our often detached demeanour is not a characteristic, but a reaction to a world which dismisses our emotional connection as faulty. It fails to appreciate the nuances and processes behind autistic empathy. So, where is the evidence for this, you might ask? You won't find it in the scientific journals, nor will you hear it from governments, and only a precious few educators and doctors are aware of it. It has come from the experiences of autistic people. It's the result of years of communication between people who have been through similar experiences and exchange notes. There was a time when autistic people were isolated and alone, rarely ever meeting another of our kind. I lived through such times with a diagnosis that nobody else shared, but then things changed. When autistic people talk amongst each other, most of the barriers present when communicating with neurotypical people, even some of those that we're close to, disappear. It doesn't mean we all share the same opinions or that conflict never happens. It just means that we speak one another's language and can understand the thought processes behind others' points of view more readily. We started to meet each other primarily via the internet. We tried to help each other make sense of the crazy, cruel world we live in. We formed social groups and support groups independent of the charities supposed to represent us, and we began to advocate for ourselves. Before long, a picture began to emerge. A small number of us were lucky enough to be born into families where our differences were not only recognised, but embraced. Families who treated their children as out of the ordinary rather than deficient. Families who encouraged our singular interests, learned to understand our emotions and thought processes. These families allowed their children to develop naturally and with support, instead of trying to cure them or condition them into something they were not. These children thrived. They were allowed to be themselves and supported rather than antagonised, and they were happier, sometimes highly successful as adults. They rarely experienced the meltdowns, depression or risks of self-harm that their peers went through. It became clear that by being treated as equal human beings with feelings, unique thoughts and potential, they didn't betray the supposed symptoms experienced by others. Then there were others of us who may not have benefited from such an upbringing, but had managed to gain control of our lives. We cut ourselves off from derisive parents, forced ourselves through education, found ourselves gainful employment and either led solitary lives or managed to find partners who were understanding and supportive, even grateful for our different outlooks and behaviours. We realised that our meltdowns were less frequent, our depression and anxiety lifted, and that we were more optimistic about our futures than ever before. Those of us who have not had to experience or have escaped from the worst of the marginalisation, prejudice and poor treatment that is the regular lot of autistic people have not only scotched the myth of some traits being inherent to autism, we've demonstrated that other traits can actually be strengths if properly harnessed. As of now, some small inroads are being made in academia and medicine to establish this reality as acknowledged scientific fact, in the hope that autistic people might in future be given a fairer opportunity to be part of life instead of pariahs at the fringes. Governments need to be educated, charities need reform, and the general public are in dire need of understanding of what autism actually is, rather than the stunted, deficit-driven narrative that currently prevails. Nobody can provide insight into the lives of autistic people better than autistic people. So our observations and our concerns should be at the forefront of every research project, every autism organisation, and every law or policy concerning our welfare. We cannot expect the limited numbers of autistic people within the research and academic establishment to carry this burden for us all. When research into autism is conducted, it should be with a view to benefiting autistic people based on what we consider worth addressing. Very few research projects have even consulted with autistic people before going ahead. Still fewer have autistic people involved in the research itself, and those led by autistic researchers are barely visible. Yet those same non-autistic researchers benefit from our input and our labour when we're invited to participate in their work, for little or no reward, yet fail to advance the understanding of autism or improve our quality of life. Autism research is of little to no value unless the priorities of autistic people are placed at the forefront of any and all research projects. Before we take part in these projects, what questions could we be asking? Is the project leader autistic? How many autistic people were involved in the planning of the project? How will the results of this research help me as an autistic person to lead a less stressful, more fulfilling life? If the answers to those questions don't fill you with the utmost confidence, is it worth taking part at all? If autistic people were actively included in the conversation, the autism chicken and egg problem as it stands would be quickly recognised as a myth. Autistic people who have found a sense of community and support from others already know this. There is no which came first, because the answer is clear. There is an undeniable line of cause and effect between mistreatment and trauma and its psychological effects, which we are uniquely talented to identify. The future of autistic people lies in our own hands. The task we face is in helping the rest of the world catch up with what we already know. Thank you for watching.